A 26-year football career is an impressive achievement for any player, but imagine how impressive it would be if you've never touched a football in your life. This is the story of the world's biggest scammer, Carlos Kaiser. On April the 2nd, 1963, a child was born and he goes by the name of Carlos Henrique Raposo, also known as Kaiser. He was born in a favela in Brazil and he was not born to a rich family but rather a very poor family. But just like millions of people around the world, his dream was to become a professional footballer one day. However, like most of us, he didn't have the footballing abilities or the physical abilities. Now at this point, most of us would just move on with our life and give up on the dream of football. But that wasn't the case with Carlos. Carlos was determined to becoming a footballer and he was willing to do anything to achieve his dream. Yes, anything. So Carlos kept thinking for days and days until he finally came up with a plan to make that dream happen. Carlos's plan was this. There was a football legend in Brazil called Renato Gaúcho. Now this football legend was loved by basically everyone in Brazil, especially the ladies. In fact, Renato Gaúcho said, "I have been with more women than Pelé has scored goals." Okay, so like now you might ask, well, what does that have to do with Kaiser? I will tell you in a second. As I mentioned earlier, everyone in Brazil loved Renato Gaúcho and so did Kaiser. But Kaiser took it to the next level because he decided to become Renato Gaúcho. Yes, literally just like stealing his identity. So Carlos would dress up exactly like Renato, he would get the same haircut as him, he even wore the same glasses as him. And after a while, someone actually mistaked him for Renato. So now that people think he is Renato Gaúcho, he would go to restaurants and they would give him free meals, and when he goes to clubs, they would give him free drinks. He would also have a ton of women coming up to him asking to have with him. And if he says no, some women would even offer him money to do with them because they thought they were having with Renato Gaúcho. So he was basically getting paid for the act. He was not only a scammer, but he was also an entrepreneur. But this stolen identity thing had a little problem. The problem was that people would say things like, "I saw Renato Gaúcho with 5 women last night." No, I saw him with 10 women. And Renato Gaúcho is married, so Kaiser was basically ruining Renato's relationship. But one night when Renato walked into a bar, he asked for a free drink and told the bouncer that he was Renato. The bouncer laughed at him and told him that Renato was already inside. Renato went inside to see what was going on and then he saw Kaiser. Now you may think that Renato beat Kaiser up, but they actually became friends. In fact, when Renato was asked why didn't you beat him up, he said, "It is not like he robbed anybody." So now that Kaiser got exposed in Brazil, he needs a career outside of Brazil, specifically in Europe. So Kaiser takes his Brazilian passport with him to convince clubs that he will be the next Pelé, and he signs a contract with Ajaccio in France. The French people were so excited to welcome the next Pelé that they set up a whole stadium ceremony where he was just getting flowers, kissing babies, but when he was told to do some kick-ups, he did them in awful form, so he just threw the ball at the crowd as a gift. And the fans accepted his gift. In fact, Kaiser said he could have stayed in the club for 10 years without playing because the fans loved him. The first training session with the club was absolutely amazing for Carlos. He ran 10 meters and then fell on the ground saying his knees hurt him. As time went by, the coach started to hate Kaiser because he was always tired during training and was always injured. Keep in mind though, he was not actually injured, he was just faking injuries so that the coach doesn't get him on the pitch. But even though the coach hated him, the vice president of the club loved him like a son for some reason. Some resources say that the vice president of the club was in some sort of mafia in Brazil. The vice president of the club would always say that even if Kaiser didn't play, it is great for the club to have a South American player. The club kept Kaiser for a few years until they finally got tired of him, so they sent him back on loan to Brazil. That means that Kaiser has to find himself a new club, but this time it's a little easier for him because he had played in Europe. But Kaiser also claimed that he had played for Independiente before Ajaccio and that he was with them when they won the Intercontinental Cup against Barcelona. Now Kaiser made this false claim because the Independiente lineups included a player with the name Carlos Enrique, the same as Carlos Enrique, but the only difference is there was a letter missing. Not to mention that that player was an Argentinian, so it was a complete scam. But there is something suspicious about Kaiser playing for Ajaccio. Baptiste Gentili, the man who was leading Ajaccio at that time, doubts that Kaiser even spent time with the club. He confirmed that two Brazilians did pass through the club during a few short months in the 1980s, one of which could have been Kaiser. But according to Kaiser, or at least the journalist that he had befriended to help make his lies credible, he was a legend in Ajaccio after spending 8 years with the club. Kaiser's next step was to find himself a new club, so he signed with the Brazilian football club Bangu with a simple plan. First, get a signing bonus. Second, fake an injury for a while. Third, leave the club the moment he had raised any suspicions. But it wasn't that easy. Of course there was a problem. Bangu's president, Castor, was an odd man. He was one of the richest men in Brazil, but don't be fooled because all the money had come from running an illegal gambling ring and trafficking of basically everything. The guy was also super aggressive. He would only light his cigars with $100 bills. But the creepy old man didn't stop there. He would make the players kiss his hands like he was the Pope, and they were all obviously terrified of him. The players told Kaiser about a time a player got injured before a big match. He was on the floor crying. Castor came down from the stands, walked slowly towards him and shot the floor next to him. The guy got up and started running, and Castor told him, "See, you can clearly still play tomorrow." Kaiser obviously doesn't have any clue on how to play football, so to convince Castor that he will be the next best thing, he would pay people in the crowd to shout his name. And it worked. The president loved Kaiser. He would invite him to his office to talk and have coffee. He even made him try his $100 bill cigars. Everything was going great for Kaiser. He was drunk out of his mind every night. He was having with multiple women a day. He was basically that guy. But then things started to get bad for Kaiser. Kaiser's team was getting bad results in the league, and then one night he got a call at 4 a.m. telling him that he needed to be present the next day for a match. But Kaiser wasn't worried because he was gonna be on the bench. He arrived at the team's hotel so late that some players were just waking up. But when the match started, they told Kaiser to warm up because he was gonna get on the pitch. Kaiser started panicking and his heart was beating so fast. But then Kaiser finally figured it out. A few fans were insulting Kaiser from the stands, so he took that as a chance and jumped over the fence and began fighting the fans. He then successfully got sent off. Castor was so mad with what Kaiser had done, so he took him to the locker room and started aggressively yelling at him. Kaiser was so terrified and thought it was the end, but then Kaiser said, "I'm sorry I did that, but I couldn't let the fans insult you like that, calling you a criminal when you have been like a father to me. I'm sorry, but in 15 days my contract will end, so at least just let me leave." Castor was so impressed that he gave Kaiser a contract renewal and doubled his salary. Kaiser kept doing this trick for the rest of his career, which lasted 10 years. Kaiser's story was one of a kind. He was such a shitty player, but he had the brain of a professional thief. And his story just goes to show that sometimes cheaters do in fact win.